Let's go to our next speaker, an old friend, Dr. Wang Huiyao, Henry Wang, who is the founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization and former counselor to the China State Council. Henry, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Steve. It's great to see you again, and also all the distinguished panelists. And it's also great to attend this great event. Thanks for the invitation. I think I agree. I echo quite a few what the previous speakers' views. I think the globalization needs to be strengthened, and we need to really institutionalize more mechanism to promote that. I think there's several observations from my personal point. First, I think that globalization is at a crossroad, but if you're talking from Chinese point of view, I think now we are probably seeing at the end, light at the end of a tunnel now. I think that Dr. Fan mentioned, I mean, China is not in the post-COVID period, but it's starting to turn around now, and we see now in Beijing you don't need a PCR test to go to any office buildings now or public venues. So that's a great thing, and there's no more zero COVID emphasized anymore by Vice Premier last week now. So I think things starting turning around, and our office has resumed full functions work now since this week. So I'm glad to see that finally, even though now China has the highest number of cases, but then there was no more tight situation like we used to see in the past. So that's one first point. I think that really going to lead to a great retaliatory economic growth. So I would say next year, China should at least have 5% or 6% growth. That would be good news for the globalization and for the regional development. So that's number one point that I would like to make. Number two is that I see China now starting to really busy engage global leaders and dialogues and visits. President Xi actually today is going to Saudi Arabia to attend China Arabic Summit, and he just come back from APEC, G20, and we had a parade of global leaders visiting China, about 7, 8 of them just in the last 1 month. Of course, we're going to have just last week, President Michel of EU was in town, and maybe in January we'll have President Macron coming. So I see that China, actively re-engage the world leaders in face-to-face meetings would be a great momentum that that we're going to probably make things, put things forward. Thirdly, I think that with the Asia Pacific really fast developing economy, China being one of the backbone of this support. So we would like to see more of RCEP playing more positive roles, and then CPTPP, that China really can get more into the discussion, and also including the digital DIPA, that we can get into that. So that would be really also very, very important. And of course, we're going to see China going to hold its third Belt and Road International Conference next year, as President Xi announced, talked about in APEC in Thailand. So I think there's a momentum that's starting to build up, and China probably could play more active role in terms of leading this globalizing, more inclusive, more supportive of all the economy. And finally, I'd like to say, I think Asia still is the biggest engine, probably in the world. ASEAN now is, one of the largest trading partners with China. The integration of the region, is really important. So we shouldn't have those decoupling or cold war mentality. Really, I mean, influence. I'm glad to see China, Japan, Korea is also in some talks, and so we hope that we can really revive this multilateral spirit and really put things forward. And so I think, I'm glad to see Asia Pacific Summit. APEC has been really first time have such a re-emphasize Asia Pacific, which is a very mature, very developed. So let's really work on this APEC, RCEP, CPTPP. But eventually we have FTAP, so that China could, the US can work together. And also I hope that China EU comprehensive agreement on investment, the CAI, can be revived as well. So let's have more of this kind of a dialogue. So I'm really appreciate what Dr. Chai just mentioned, that WTO should be strengthened. We see some progress at the MC12 minister meeting. We heard from Pasqualani yesterday, also mentioned that. But that's really, Steve is really also pushing for the globalization. Let's get all the efforts so we can really also put a floor to this deteriorating downward spiral of globalization, and let's make it a new inclusive globalization forward. So I think this meeting is really great. I think we can really, with China, finally turning around, with the world isolation seems coming to the end. Let's get the optimism back into the narrative, and let's really push forward for the more high-speed development. I think by the time next year, when if China revive the tourism, China used to have 150 million outbound tourists. So let's China really open that, and then really unleash this power of traveling around the world and welcome more foreigners coming to China. I'm sure the quarantine will come down very soon now. So let's hope that we are seeing progress, and we hope to make it more effective for our friends around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. And what could be done to actually strengthen this international cooperation and institutional cooperation from your perspective?
Yes, thank you, Steve. Good question. And I think that there's several ways. I think first is that we probably should help to reshape a bit of a narrative. I mean, we see some countries really propose that democracy versus autocracy. So that doesn't really explain the multipolar world we're living in right now. I mean, China has a unique model of hybrid economy. We have a private sector contributes 60% of GDP, and another 20% SOE does all the social work, and another 20% multinational foreign company does all the import export. So that's really unique Chinese style of modernization. And also, of course, China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty, and now it's talking about, how about making 300 million migrant workers into middle class? So that's another job China is doing now. So I think, first we got a narrative that really can be accepted by the world, and then, do not view China as a threat, as a problem. Second, I think also is that there's many things. I mean, climate change is certainly China can work. Definitely, China is now the biggest emission of carbon dioxide. It has to work with the U.S. and other large emitters as well. So China, EU, U.S. should really demonstrate some leadership on that, and we can work together. Thirdly, I think that infrastructure is another common sense, the consensus we had around the world. China has a BRI already 10 years now, but then President Biden has B3W, and the EU has Global Gateway, and even G7 said infrastructure project. So why don't we have, AIB we mentioned about here, and World Bank and ADB, AFDB, all those development banks work together, have a big chunk of a BI and the B3W and the Global Gateway, and then really form a transparency and, let's find something to work together. And also digital. I mean, digital, US is the largest, China is the second, EU is the third. Let's work on the digital thing. So I'm thinking, that there's many areas. Of course, then we talk about energy, food crisis, and also some consensus on the justice, like China against the nuclear war, talking to Scholz and talking to Biden. I mean, that's a consensus of international community, and also respect sovereignty and territorial integrity. All those are great things. So we should really, have a common denominator and minimize the differences, and find a few good projects to work on. Revive the multilateral spirit and have a new Bretton Woods moment, after 75 years of Bretton Woods. So I think many things we can work on, and dialogue like this and narrative like this is really important. So appreciate that, APEC and ASEAN and, RCEP, CPTPP, and all those mechanisms can play more role. AIB and BI, B3W, and all those mechanisms, put them together to strengthen the globalization architecture and mechanism.
Thanks, Henry. And in fact,